Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami ito parang sakajang dhammo so tapoti. Okay, so in responding, good to be back. Good to be back. I've been off the radar for a little while, so been off on trips and all these kinds of things. So it's good to be back. And yeah, as well, happy Mother's Day to everybody that's here, that's a mother, that's online, that's a mother. So it's your day of rest and relaxation. So hopefully somebody's spoiling you at some point today. And I'd also just like to say I really give my wholehearted anumodana to everybody that was involved in the Vesak celebrations over the weekend, and that is absolutely phenomenal of how much was actually raised. That's such a rare thing to find. So yeah, I think we can all sort of rejoice in that goodness of giving to such what we say is a very, very worthwhile cause that will be for the long-term benefit of many other people. So give my wholehearted gratitude for that as well. So I think this is a very, very good thing. A lot of people did a lot of things above and beyond what I did. I just sort of hid in the background and I sat down. I didn't do too much. So there's a lot of hard work that went into it. So really grateful for everyone for that. And so I thought would start off today, and maybe it's going to be hard to tie this into Mother's Day, but in some way I'll try to tie it into Mother's Day to some extent. So what I've been thinking about a little bit at the moment is, most of us have come to Buddhism, and a lot of you have sort of come here today. You're probably very interested in meditation, and you're trying to do meditation. You're trying to have a meditation practice. And a lot of us have this idea about what meditation is. We might think, okay, it's observing the sensations in your body. It's maybe watching your breath, following the Anapanasati Sutta. It's maybe developing mindfulness. It's developing loving kindness. And I'd probably say that you do this for some sort of reason, yeah? There's some sort of reason that we actually want to meditate, and maybe I'm not so presumptuous in saying you're probably trying to improve something about your life in some way, something about your existence. In some way, you're using meditation to try to make you a better person. Is that a fair assumption? Yeah, fair assumption? So what I think is an interesting question is like, well, how is meditation actually doing that for you? How is watching the breath or something, or watching the sensations, how is that actually making you a better person in some way? That's it's a hard question to answer. And I could sort of suggest and think that, well, one way meditation can actually make you a better person and improve something about your life is by giving us the ability to be mindful and reflect on our habitual speech and our actions. So in short, what it's helping us to do is become mindful of the way that we morally engage in the world. But again, it's not so obvious how one tracks to the other. So what I wanted to talk about today is a kind of mindfulness, a kind of meditation that we can actually do, where we do actually reflect on our morality. And this is something that the Buddha called silanusati. And it's, again, we think of meditation, we think of the breath, but we can actually use the recollection of morality as a means to develop meditation. So I'll talk about how silanusati, or mindfulness of morality, how we can use this as a meditation to reflect on our morality, and we can use moral reflection as a means to meditate. So there's a bit of a difference there, and we'll go over it as we go along. So the first question we need to ask ourselves, though, is like, well, why morality? Like, why bother thinking about morality if If meditation's to improve something about your mind, improve something about the quality of your mind, why think about morality? Does anybody have a decent answer to that, or? No? Nobody has an answer to that? Yeah? Yeah.
Well, I know that the Buddha taught that sila is the... Okay. Thank you. Do I have to push anything? No, okay. I know that the Buddha taught that sila is the underpinning to successful meditation.
Yep.
In other words, that you can't meditate if ethics are not being observed.
Yeah, that's a pretty good thought on why, and I'd sort of agree with that, and you extend on that in some kind of way. And again, if we're thinking about meditation in terms of improving something about the quality of our mind and controlling something about our mind through meditation, if we can't really control our speech and our actions, we can't really control our mind in some way. If you can't control these coarser outer things, it's going to be very, very hard for you to actually control your mind in some kind of way. So you're right. Reflecting on morality and thinking about morality, this is this kind of basis and a foundation of developing a good meditation practice. And so we can think about this as like, a lot of people say, have that kind of assumption that this is the start of a meditation practice. You need to do this. But I'd also go a bit further to say as well that even if you've been practicing meditation for a long time, this is a very good, you could say, litmus test or area where you could say, well, actually, is my meditation working or not? Am I being more moral? Is my speech getting better? Are my actions getting better? So if we think, again, about, well, why morality? A lot of us might, when you think about morality, when some people think about morality, they think in some way this is restricting you in some way. If you're thinking about morality, it's some sort of restriction, it's some sort of limitation. You know, as a monk, I have a lot of rules, and people always say to me, it's like, don't you miss doing this? Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And so a lot of the times we have this view that morality is this kind of restriction or limitation. But in essence, if you've been doing this for a while, you actually start to see that there's a kind of freedom in morality, a kind of freedom that you don't get by just sort of following all your wants and desires and your impulses. It actually brings about a kind of freedom. And so we can see that it brings about a kind of freedom, you know, a freedom from worry, a freedom from remorse. But it also, what I'll try to go through a little bit today is how it actually brings about the freedom of liberation as well. And so there's this really nice passage in the early Buddhist texts in something called the Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha is speaking to his assistant, Ananda. And just for anybody that doesn't know Ananda was the Buddha's assistant for a long time. Most of the Buddha's career, actually. He was the Buddha's cousin. And he was also the foremost in memory as well, so of recollecting the teaching. So without Ananda was the one that actually, after the Buddha passed away, they had this council, and Ananda was the one that recited all the teaching. So he was the foremost in memory. But he was also, Ananda at the time when he was looking after the Buddha, he was the assistant to the Buddha. He was also what we call a Sotapanna. He was actually enlightened as well. And the thing I like so much about Ananda is that even though he was enlightened and he was the foremost in memory, every time he talked to the Buddha, he didn't presume that he knew things. He probed and asked the Buddha questions and asked for clarifications and really, really tried to get at the heart of what the Buddha was actually teaching. I think that's why he became one of the foremost in memory, because he continually asked and asked for clarification. And anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but there's this really nice passage where the Buddha actually asks Ananda actually asks the Buddha, it's like, well, what is the benefit of keeping wholesome morality? And the Buddha said to Ananda, it's for freedom from remorse. And so that in itself, freedom from remorse, that's already such an insightful thing and such a practical and useful thing. If you keep good morality, you're free from remorse. So there's a kind of freedom there. And now, maybe most of us would be like, great, freedom from remorse, sweet, we'll stop there. And this is why I really love Ananda, because Ananda kept going, kept asking, kept probing the Buddha, kept inquiring, didn't assume that he just sort of knew what this thing meant. And so he asked the Buddha, well, what's the benefit of freedom from remorse? And the Buddha said, joy. There's a joy that comes up. And again, Ananda asked further, what's the benefit of joy? What's joy for? The Buddha said, to bring about rapture. What's the benefit of rapture? What's rapture for? It's to bring about tranquility. What's tranquility for? To bring about happiness. So again, most of us here would go, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. Joy, rapture, tranquility, happiness, I'll sign up for all those. They're all good things. But again, Ananda being the philosophically rigorous and clarifying person that he was, kept going. Well, what's the benefit of, where am I up to? Happiness. And the Buddha said, of samadhi, of concentration. So samadhi can come out of keeping wholesome morality. And again, Ananda doesn't stop. He's like, well, what's the benefit of samadhi? And the Buddha said, there's knowledge and vision of reality of the way things are. And that's already pretty good, but he kept going. What's the benefit of knowledge and vision of the way things are? And the Buddha said, for detachment and dispassion, of what we call nibbida. And again, Ananda keeps going. What's the benefit of detachment and dispassion? And the Buddha said, freedom and knowledge of liberation, of nibbana. So Ananda can't really go any further there. Nibbana is seen as the highest thing we can get as from the Buddhist teachings. So what we can actually see in this interaction here is that the benefit of morality, one, it brings about these wholesome mind states, these positive mind states that we have. And it also brings about samadhi as well. But it's also a basis for developing liberation as well. So focusing on our morality, this is, you could say, it's like the bedrock of liberation, and it's the wellspring of these wholesome qualities, these positive qualities that come about in the mind. And so we can sort of now further ask ourselves, well, what are we talking about when we say morality then? What are we talking about what kind of morality are we thinking of? Now, obviously, hopefully you followed the chant of what we just did just before, went through the 5 precepts. So in Buddhism, we have the 5 precepts, we have the 8 precepts. There's the monastic kind of precepts and things that we have to follow. And these are, you could say, like an ethical kind of standard, a guideline of the way that we can actually live our lives, so a kind of framework that we can use. And, these, again, just doing these, staying within these frameworks, it is actually very, very beneficial for us. But if we're like Ananda, we should try to probe a little bit further into them and what are they actually doing. If we think about what the precepts, the 5 precepts are, it's like they're like a kind of guide rail that keeps us sort of within a particular kind of territory. But there's a lot of room to move within those territory, within that territory. You can think with the 5 precepts. Well, okay, today's Mother's Day, right? Now, what does the 5 precepts tell you about calling your mum today and talking to your mum? Not much. But calling your mother and talking to your mother on Mother's Day, it's a good moral thing to do. The 5 precepts don't really talk about what about ignoring people. Doesn't really say much about that. What does it talk about? What does it talk about sort of disowning people or ghosting people or something like that? It doesn't really say much about those things. Maybe it's subsumed under it, but it doesn't say much about it explicitly. So when we're thinking about morality, what we are also doing, we're not just following rules. We just haven't got these things that we're following. Morality actually requires wise reflection. It entails us to reflect very wisely on the way that we're actually interacting in the world, and reflecting of what kind of harm or ill-being am I causing to myself, or am I causing to others, or how could I be actually harming people? Maybe I'm not aware of it, but maybe I am harming people in some way. What ways am I actually supporting and contributing to the well-being of myself and the well-being of others as well? How am I doing that, and could I be doing more to do that? So morality really, reflecting on morality in this way, it really needs wise reflection. It's not just following rules. It's not just taking things at face value and doing them. We really do have to reflect very, very wisely on that. And so if we think, well, we really have to reflect on this, a kind of reflection, this comes from a kind of wisdom. And, we say in Buddhism, we need to develop wisdom, you need concentration, and you need mindfulness as well. And so this sort of brings us now to the point of, well, how do you develop mindfulness of morality? How do you actually develop this thing? How do you use this as a kind of meditation? How do you reflect on your morality in some kind of way and use it as a form of practice? And again, if we remember, you can watch the breath, you can develop loving kindness, you can do all these things, but mindfulness on morality, it is actually another kind of meditation practice we can do. It's this practice that we find again in the early Buddhist texts, in a place called the Anguttara Nikaya. It's in a few of the suttas called the Mahanama Suttas. Now, what the Buddha talks about in these suttas, he talks about what we call the 6 inspirational reflections. These are kinds of reflections and kinds of meditations that we do to uplift the mind, and they bring about a kind of joy to the mind when we reflect on them. They're mindfulness or recollection of the Buddha, mindfulness or recollection of the Dhamma, of the Sangha, and mindfulness of giving, and mindfulness of morality, and recollection or mindfulness of the devas. So these are a kind of meditation that we can do that really does actually uplift the mind quite a lot if we do them properly. And the way that the Buddha instructed it, Mahanama came and asked the Buddha. Mahanama was a very well-respected Brahmin, very well respected in his community, but he'd always come and question the Buddha and ask the Buddha some very, very pertinent and really, really good questions. And so he asked the Buddha about, if memory serves me, he asked the Buddha about how to bring up sort of joy within the mind. And the Buddha told Mahanama in these 2 suttas, so there's 2 suttas that are side by side, and they're pretty similar, but the Buddha ends by summarizing each of the practices in a little bit of a different way. And so when the Buddha was talking about mindfulness of morality, the Buddha actually said, so Mahanama, you should recollect, you should keep your mindfulness on your morality. What happens how do you keep your mindfulness on your morality? So you should think, or you should recollect like this, that my morality, it's untorn, it's unbroken, it's unblemished, it's unstained, it's liberating, again, it's freeing. My morality is praised by the wise. My morality leads to concentration. It's untarnished. And the Buddha said, when we're mindful in this way and we reflect in this way, we use this kind of active mindfulness to reflect on our morality in the different areas. The Buddha said that we're actually at that time where we're mindful of our morality, our mind is freed from greed, hatred, and delusion at that time. And when your mind is freed from greed, hatred, and delusion at that time, the Buddha said then your mind becomes, directed and straight at that point in time. And when your mind is directed and straight at that point in time, then your mind inclines towards the goal of Nibbana. It inclines towards a sense of the Dhamma. And when the mind inclines in this way to the sense of the Dhamma, then again the mind becomes joyous. Then rapture can arise. And when rapture arises, then the body becomes still and tranquil. And when the body becomes still and tranquil, then you're at ease, and then you can develop concentration. So you can see here in the Mahanama Sutta how the Buddha's instructing us to be mindful of our morality. Reflecting and thinking it's untorn, it's unbroken, it's unblemished, it's liberating. And when we do this, what it actually does is we can see it uplifts the mind by joy and rapture and all these things, but it also is allowing us to get rid of greed, hatred and delusion as well. So it's getting rid of some of these negative states and it's increasing some of these positive states. And as I said, there's two suttas sort of side by side, and the Buddha summarizes them at the end in different ways. And one way that he says to Mahanama, he says, Mahanama, so you should be mindful of your morality in this way, and you should do it when you're sitting, when you're standing, when you're walking, when you're lying down, when you're at work and you're busy in the world, or when you're at home and you're resting with your family. You should sustain this mindfulness of your morality. So we can see here that the Buddha is actually saying that this is a formal practice that we can do, but he's also saying this is a kind of mindfulness that you can bring into your daily life as well. And in the other sutta that basically says the same thing after the saying again about the recollection of morality, the Buddha says that a noble disciple who reflects on his morality in this way is one who is balanced among the unbalanced. This person is untroubled amongst the troubled. This person that reflects on their morality is one whose mind is inclined towards the stream. And this is essentially an oblique way of saying that one has become a Sotapanna. And so anybody that reflects on their morality, is mindful of their morality, their mind inclines towards the stream. So we can see here that, again, the Buddha is saying this recollection of morality, it is actually something that can lead us towards being a Sotapanna, becoming enlightened. So we can see here this meditation on morality, this mindfulness of morality, it does many things. It brings about these wholesome qualities within the mind, these positive states within the mind. It allows us to abandon unwholesome states that are in the mind. It allows us to develop samadhi. It allows us to develop wisdom, and it is a kind of meditation practice that you can do formally and throughout your daily life. And it is actually something that leads to Nibbana as well. So it has all these really good qualities, but there's, again, if we dig a little bit deeper, there's other things that it actually does. So it's, again, the inspirational recollections, they uplift the mind and bring these wholesome qualities to the mind. But also what they do is they allow us to become humble, and they allow us to maybe look at some of our shortcomings that we might have. So if you're reflecting on your morality and thinking, my morality around the first precept, it's unbroken, it's untorn, it's unblemished, you might sort of go, oh, hang on, is it? Am I perfect? So, well, actually, no. Well, there's these aspects here where it is maybe a little bit tarnished. And you reflect and say, actually, maybe I'm not as great as I think maybe I'm not as perfect as I think I am. So what this recollection also does is not just develop these wholesome qualities, but also allows you to see some of the shortcomings that you may have as well. We can go through these different aspects of our morality. Say, for example, something like the first precept, or the harm that we're actually causing people, harm or the violence or the aggression we might be causing people. We might go, okay, well, I'm not killing anyone, but am I being sort of aggressive towards people in some way? Well, maybe not overtly. Well, maybe there's some times where I'm overtly angry towards people, but maybe there's this kind of passive aggression, and that's actually hurting me. That's actually being of detriment to me. So we can sort of see this, like if we reflect on this way, it actually allows us to see what we have to do in our lives, how we can actually improve ourselves, how we actually can make ourselves better people. And if we do this, we reflect in this way, we remember, morality requires us to wisely reflect on our lives and the harm that we're causing the world. We can actually reflect, what's this kind of passive aggression or something that I might have at the moment? How is this harming me? What's it feel like to be agitated? What's it feel like to be angry towards another? What's it feel like to have these violent thoughts towards another person? What's actually that like? But then also reflecting, what's it like not to have that? What's it like to be free of that? What's the mind state like that is free of violent thoughts? This is something, again, this is freeing. This brings about a kind of freedom. And if we can also look at the other kinds of areas of our morality, the other areas of the precepts, and we can reflect on our behavior in this way. Is it unbroken? Is it untorn? Is it unstained? Is it untarnished in some kind of way? And reflecting back on it, and reflecting as well, again, going further. What's it? And we can reflect, am I maybe doing some of these things? And also looking at it from the other perspective, what's it like to be a person that gets lied to? What's it like to be a person that somebody berates you? What's it like to be a person that somebody slanders you? You can look at your own life and how you see the world when somebody is acting immorally towards you and the harm that actually causes you. And obviously nobody likes that. Nobody likes being lied to. So we can see that this actually is causing harm in some kind of way. And we can also see, well, how am I maybe doing that as well? Again, you mightn't be, blatantly lying to people, but maybe you're just not being truthful with people in some kind of way. So you can reflect and say, well, maybe I'm not explicitly doing it, but maybe I'm implicitly doing it in some kind of way. Or not just how am I doing it, but how could I be doing it? And how might I not be aware that what I'm doing is actually having an impact on somebody? A lot of the times we do things and we don't realize sort of the knock-on effect that it actually can have with others. So we have to be very circumspect. We have to reflect as like, how am I keeping this morality good, and how could this actually be impacting others around me? So we can see here, I think this reflection, this mindfulness of morality, it's a really, really powerful practice to do, because this is actually something, this is the thing that actually starts to improve your life. This is where, when people have this kind of backhanded comment to you of like, oh, meditation makes you a better person. And it's like, well, no, you have to do these things. You have to reflect in this way. And this is more the way that meditation actually does improve your life. And so if we think about, what the Buddha actually says in many places, and in many places when people ask, what's the benefit of the path? The Buddha said that the benefit of the path is it's for one's own benefit. It's for the benefit of others, and it's for the benefit of liberation. And so mindfulness of our morality and meditation on our morality, it's for our own benefit, but it's also for the benefit of others. And hopefully I've maybe convinced you that it's for the benefit of bringing about liberation. So that's probably enough of me going on a monologue. So I'll end this here now. And if anybody has any questions, they're more than welcome to ask now.
Thank you, Ajahn, for the talk.
Yep, no problem.
Question from the room?
Yep, get the ball rolling with online.
Yeah, Ajahn, I have a question online. How do we handle the fear of losing family member, especially mother?
It's a dark one on Mother's Day. It's dark, but it's pertinent for somebody that's practicing the Dhamma. We're trying to recollect that, the things that we do love, that, at some point we have to be separated from them. So, the question of how do we overcome the fear, or just deal with the fear, was it?
Handle the fears of losing
handle the fear of losing a family member.
Since it's so sad that we are together in this life for once only, how do we get out of this sad truth?
Yeah. So I think the fear obviously comes because we are recollecting in some way that we're going to lose this person, or we're recollecting in some way that there is the possibility that we will be separated from them. And so this is actually something that would bring up fear that we will become separated from them in some point. And so this in itself is a kind of Buddhist reflection. We have to reflect that actually in some point we are going to be separated from them. And while, this can bring up this kind of fear that, well, we've only got this one life with this, we're only sure of this one life that we've actually got with this person. So while that can bring up a kind of fear, hopefully maybe what that recollection can do as well is bring up a kind of gratitude as well. You only have a certain limited amount of time with your family. You only have a certain amount of years that you'll be with them. You only have a certain number of interactions with your family. So you should cherish these. So there's a fear that you might lose them to some extent, but this actually hopefully can be a cause to actually drive you to be very, very grateful and be very, show kindness towards this person, because at some point they have to leave. And if you recollect that at some point we have to be separated, what's the use of sort of arguing with them and bickering with them and any of these kinds of trivial things of like, oh, my mum does this and it annoys me and I don't want to deal with this. It's like they hopefully will all melt away if you recollect that at some point we're going to be separated. This has to happen. There's no way we can get out of it. So why do these things matter? Why do these small, tiny, insignificant things matter when at some point we're going to have to be parted? And so I think if you can reflect in this way and reflect properly in this way, hopefully it doesn't bring about the fear that you will be separated from them at some point, but it can bring about a kind of gratitude and a kind of appreciation for the time that you have, because it's only limited. So we develop this appreciation. But if you're doing this and it is bringing up fear, then maybe you just have to shift that in some way to instead of focusing on the loss, maybe try to focus more on the kind of on the opportunity that you have with them now. Right now you have the time with them. Right now you have them. So how do I make the best of that? How do I make the most of that time that I have with them now? Again, if the thought that we're going to lose them in some point is bringing up a fear, try to twist that in some way and focus on the now and focus what you actually do have with this person now and how can you get the most out of that. So hopefully that answers the question. Was there a back end of the question that I missed? Okay, cool. We're all quiet today.
I'll ask one, Ajahn.
Yeah.
You talked about the freedom associated with the precepts, and I totally agree with that. It's when especially when it's under your control, right? But there's times when I'll give an example when you say, for instance, you're on a business trip, and you go out to dinner. You may go out to dinner with a friend,
Yep.
and there's time to do you pay the bill, and then they sort of say, well, why don't you just expense this?
Yep.
Right. And
Yep.
clearly,
Yep.
there's this tension that in the heart that, well, actually, this would be stealing to effect, because it's not legitimately an expense. So it seems that when things are under your control, you can, but then there's this tension that comes about when you get into situations where where you're being influenced by someone else to go down another track.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. And this is where the kind of the rubber meets the road with morality in this kind of way, in that we can sort of reflect, okay, well, I don't kill, I don't steal, I don't do all these kinds of things, all these big things I don't do, and I can reflect on them in this way, and I have this kind of standard that I have. But then, and so you do this in your own mind, in your own heart, and then when you actually get out in the world's messy. The world is messy, there's so many things coming up, you're having to make these kind of real-time snap decisions, and it's difficult. You get pulled by people. We are social creatures, and we get pulled and moved in different ways by the crowd and the people that are around us. And sometimes we just get caught up in the situation. So it's difficult. It's difficult to keep our morality when we're interacting with the world in some kind of way. Now, a lot of people, when they look at a monastic's life, they go, wow, you keep so many precepts, and wow, that must be insane. You must keep them all perfectly, and all these kinds of things. And it's like, well, perfect's a very high bar. But also, one thing to remember is, for most monastics, we stay in monasteries most of the time, and the environment's really conducive to us to actually keep our morality. It's like when you get out in the world, it's like, oh man, this is difficult. Like I could see how this is difficult. I want to yell at these people. Like I can't. So when we sort of come up against the world, it is actually difficult. But I think this is where developing this mindfulness of immorality is really important. This is where it comes online. We can get into a situation where maybe we don't like somebody, and if we've been practicing something like metta meditation, maybe the metta meditation kicks in online at that time. Oh, actually, I should be, may they be well, may they be happy. If we've been doing a lot of this kind of metta meditation, at that time where we meet somebody that we don't like, we have a bit more mindfulness to be kind to them, to extend some goodwill to them. And so if we use this recollection on immorality, what this does is similar to something like metta. We're mindful of our morality. So we see it's like, actually, this is a morally grey area. Because you're using that as a form of mindfulness, this is a morally grey area. How should I act? How should I act in this way? How should I sort of move about in the world that is the most morally appropriate thing to do? And so this kind of mindfulness of morality, in some way, it prepares you for those situations. Prepares you for those situations that are morally grey and ambiguous. And this is not related, but it's this is sort of related in some kind of way, but it's not actually to that point. One thing I forgot to mention with recollecting on our morality in this way is being mindful of our morality in this way. It's not like we're doing this of like beating ourselves up. So when the check comes or whatever, and it's like I just charged it to the company or whatever. It's like you don't use it as a way to berate yourself. Like, aren't I a wicked and evil person because I charged this to the multinational company that has a lot of money? It's not a matter of beating yourself up in these kinds of ways and berating yourself and acting as some kind of inquisitor to all the bad things that you've done and making yourself feel terrible. This mindfulness of your morality, you should be trying to do it in a way where it's like a good friend, a good kind friend that actually encourages you and points out some of the things where you may be lacking in some kind of way. That's what a good friend does to you, points out truths to you that you don't see about yourself. And so in a situation like this where we're coming up against the world, look, we're going to make mistakes. You're going to do the wrong things sometimes. That's how this works. But it's not about ignoring that is a morally ambiguous situation that we could have done better. But it's also not about berating ourselves that, aren't I a terrible person? It's like, well, how do I, next time, if I'm in a situation like this, how do I catch myself? How do I maybe behave a little bit better? How do I mediate this situation in some kind of better way? So to answer the actual question, this mindfulness of morality and recollecting your morality, this is something that starts to have a knock-on effect into the world as well. If you do it as a formal practice, it, again, like something like metta, it does have a knock-on effect when you actually start to go out in the world and you just become more aware of the moral situation. Because, you can do metta meditations, it's fine, everything's good and everything's happy and I'm all well and I have a lot of kindness for other people in my heart and all these kinds of things, and you might go out and you might just do these terrible things. But you got this, I'm so joyous and happy in my heart, but you might be doing terrible things out in the world. So this is why I think we have to actually reflect on our morality in this way. So it just keeps us safe, and it keeps us humble. It keeps us not deluding ourselves that we are a good person in some kind of way, that we can improve ourselves in some kind of way, and that there is this means that we actually have where we can start to improve our lives in some kind of way and make ourselves a better person through that recollection. Does that answer the question, or? Not really. The world is messy. Yeah, the world is it's messy. It's terrible. It's like the world is morally messy, and the bad thing about it is the goalpost always keeps shifting. What's moral now is not what is socially and normatively moral right now is not going to be socially and normatively moral in 10 years. This changes. It changes all the time. Hopefully killing and things like that will still be seen as morally bad later. But it all keeps shifting the whole time. So again, this is why, having something like the 5 precepts, it's a good guide rail. But you have to keep recollecting. You have to keep recollecting because the world is messy. It's and acting and speaking appropriately is going to change over time. It's going to change with different situations as well. So yeah, it's messy, but what do you do with a mess? You have to do your best to keep it clean.
Hi, I'm really new in this, so
yep.
Okay, cool. I'm just really new in Buddhism, so what are you talking about the 5 precepts? They're quite black and white.
Yep.
You do or you don't.
Yep.
Can you find a middle way? Because the Buddha also talks about the middle way.
Yep.
I know he talks in different direction about doing or not doing it, but can you just assume the same for the 5 precepts?
So do you mean okay, so the 5 precepts are very...
No, for example, the example that he gives, how we deal with that, really. Can you take the loss? Okay, I pay for the bill, don't worry about it, I pay for it. That's one way, okay, take the loss. Don't worry about the company. That's one way, and I didn't lie, I did it on myself. Yep. So, but how can you find a middle way? I understand killing is not killing.
So you're right. The 5 precepts, they're very, very black and white, and it's very much, okay, cool, this is what you do. But this is why I said they're like a kind of guide. They're kind of like a guide rail. There's so much movement in the middle of that. And so this is actually, we have to find the most appropriate means to deal with the situation in that time. And so the middle way in different areas within those 5 precepts, it is going to be a little bit different every time. And, sometimes you're going to maybe skew more towards of like, I'm pretty close to breaking that thing, or maybe I did break that precept. Or you're going to skew more towards, well, actually, yeah, I did really well, and I didn't lie there, and I didn't take anything. So there's a lot of movement in the middle. So you do have to find some kind of middle way. Sometimes you have to find a bit of a compromise. Things in the world are messy. So you do the best with what you can. You're not going to get these things perfect. You're not going to be morally perfect in every situation that you're in. You're going to make mistakes. And so what this requires of us is to use this kind of wise reflection on our morality and really be honest with ourselves. It's like, actually, I probably could have done better in that instance. Or, actually, no, I did really, really well. And so maybe next time, what's the best way to go about that? Another example is of like telling the truth. Now, sometimes we have this, if you have the precepts in mind, telling the truth is always good. But, sometimes it's actually like brutal to tell somebody the truth. We all say it's like, oh, I wish everybody would tell me the truth. But when people tell you the truth, it's like, oh, it sucks. It's like, wow, that's full on. Like, so, telling the truth all the time, it can actually hurt somebody. Telling the truth can hurt. So how do you find the middle way of that? So, the kind of the bar here is like, I have to tell the truth, but I have to do it in a kind way. I have to find the middle way of telling the truth where I'm telling this person the truth, but I'm doing it in this kind way. Or I'm doing it in this way where it's like, well, I don't have to put myself in a situation where I would have to lie to them. So the example there might be something like, well, you get sort of, like, let's just say you have a friend or you have a partner, and they say like, do I look fat in this? Do I look fat in this? What do you usually say? It's like, oh, yeah, you look fantastic. Like, you look fantastic. I'm just saying, oh, that's a white lie. You're just putting on a bit of weight. So it's like, so sometimes there isn't a perfect answer. Yeah, and how do you actually get around telling this person the truth in some way, but doing it in a nice and kind way that is actually of benefit to them? Because if you're using this example of like, well, if somebody is like, do I look good in this? If you actually lie to them and give them a white lie, it's like you might actually send them like, I don't know, they might look like an idiot. Like they might look terrible in this. As like if you tell them the truth in some way, maybe they have the opportunity to change their clothes and look better and, go out into the world more confident. Do I look fat in this? It's like, well, well, do you feel like do you really feel like do you feel fat in that? And so it might be actually the cause for them to go, maybe I should like start to lose some weight. So, say for example, a white lie in this instance, it is actually causing this person harm. Maybe they're going out looking not so good, or they're just continuing to put on more and more weight. So, again, how do you find the middle ground there? You don't want to go, it's like, yeah, you look fat. Like, you look terrible. You obviously don't want to do that, but you also don't want to lie to them either. So, yeah, you have to find a middle ground. You have to find this kind of, well, how do I do this in the best way where I am being kind to them, but I'm also being truthful as well. And the last thing I'll say about this is like, this is a kind of test in some way. You get it wrong. Sometimes you say the wrong things. Sometimes you do the wrong things. It's like, but you have to practice. You have to get better at doing it. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Trying to be moral, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to hurt people. You're going to do the wrong things. You're going to, actually, sometimes you make things a lot worse trying to be moral. But it's about trying to do it, trying to train in it and do it, and testing the waters in different ways and becoming more and more skillful with these instances of something like a white lie, you just get better at telling the truth. It's not like you just continue to not lie. You just actually get better and more skillful in the way that you tell the truth to people. And to remember that morality, and especially in a Buddhist sense, like the 5 precepts, it's a training. It's something that we train in, we practice in. Again, from a monastic perspective, we have a lot of rules. Like there's so many of them, there's heaps of them. We don't keep them perfectly. We say that it's a training, and we recognize when we've fallen from that training, or we've done something that's not in alignment with the rules. And we recognize it, and we try to improve ourselves in some kind of way by, confessing it to another monk, and then trying to train ourselves better in the future. So this middle way is like you have to train. You have to train in it. Again, the 5 precepts are a great guardrail, but you really do have to sort of test the waters yourself. So yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah?
I have a question from our online audience.
Yeah.
How to develop parameters, the perfect virtues.
Yeah. So developing the parameters. So for anybody that doesn't know, and this is where I'm going to forget some of them, the parameters are, developing compassion, loving kindness, developing wisdom, developing samadhi, developing dana, generosity. Help me out here. I'm blanking. There's 10 of them anyway. There's 10 of them. So how do we develop them? We develop each of them in a different kind of way. So developing like the parameter of samadhi. This is very, very different from developing the parameter of giving. They're interrelated in some kind of way, but you are doing different things. So if you're thinking about the parameter of generosity and giving, then you have to actively try to recollect on this thing and, find ways to be generous and to give. If you're trying to develop the parameter of samadhi, then you're going to have to find ways to find time to do more meditation, develop a particular kind of meditation, particular kind of concentration. So developing the parameters, we have to sort of look at each one of them separately, and we have to think, well, how can I develop this one parameter? It's really hard when we just take the whole lot and go, I just need to develop them all. That's can lead to some kind of overload of like, well, there's so many of them to develop. How am I going to do all this at the one time? Just pick one. Just pick one, and it's like, well, how can I get better at doing generosity? How can I actively act in a way that I can be more generous? How can I reflect on my generosity in some way? And using that as, as a kind of reflection and a kind of way, the way you're trying to act in the world and trying to do that one thing. And the nice thing about the Buddhist path, and especially things with like the parameters, is that if you develop one, it will have a knock-on effect on the other one. So again, if you're thinking about how to be more generous, being more generous in this way, it does start to have a knock-on effect to the sila barami, to the morality barami. It does have a knock-on effect. Again, remember, if we think about morality in terms of using it as a basis to develop wholesome qualities and good qualities in the mind and develop samadhi, being generous is going to have this kind of knock-on effect later to develop more samadhi. So they're interrelated in this way. But if you spend a bit of time focusing on one, this is going to be very, very useful, but it's also going to have a bit of a knock-on effect. But then also remember, developing the 10 parameters is, if you look at the Buddha, the Buddha developed them over the multiple lifetimes, really, really long time. So it's not like you're going to get perfect at them straight away. It's not like you're going to go, cool, I've got the list. By next month, I'm going to have them perfected. Again, they're a training. They're something we have to keep working on. So the shorthand, the advice is like, just pick one. Just pick one, get good at it. reflect on the ways that you can actually do this. Hopefully today I've shown one way where you can look at the sila paramita, the paramita of morality, and this is one way you can actually use this to develop that parami. So hopefully that answers the question. So yeah.
Any more questions from the audience?
Thank you, Ajahn. Yeah. I find it very good that you said reflection on sila, morality, but I'm still trying to connect how you reflection on the sila can give you liberation and freedom. I'm trying to see that connection. Thank you. Please elaborate.
Yeah, good. So, in a way, what it does, it serves as like a basis. It serves as a basis for these. Again, if we think if you reflect on your morality and you're thinking about your morality and you're seeing that your morality is actually good, what this gives you is a freedom from remorse. You don't have this worry that I'm treating people badly in some kind of way, and I'm I'm keeping my mind wholesome. I'm developing these wholesome states. These wholesome states from keeping morality start to have that knock-on effect, where it's like, well, I'm free from remorse. So what does freedom from remorse give me? It gives me this joy. This joy that I'm actually, I'm operating well in the world. I have this joy can bring about the rapture if you're piti, and it can bring about sukha. It can bring about the happiness as well. These are like a foundation or support for your meditation to develop samadhi, to develop concentration. Developing that well, actually, the more we develop that, it actually starts to lead us closer and closer towards liberation. So it's not like you keep good morality and then there's this kind of jump over and you're liberated. If you're just like a perfectly good moral person, doesn't mean that you're going to be naturally liberated in that sense. But what it does, it provides like a scaffolding and a support to develop all these other qualities. And if we remember in the Mahanama Sutta, it's like if you reflect on your morality, at that time, you're free from greed, hatred, and delusion. And your mind starts to incline towards the Dhamma, it inclines towards the goal, it inclines towards thinking about liberation and practicing towards liberation. So it's not this kind of one-to-one, I'm moral, I'm a good person, I keep the 5 precepts good, and cool, I'm enlightened. No, it's not quite like that, but it acts as a support. Without that support, it's very, very difficult to develop those other factors that lead you to Nibbana. Again, like I said at the start, if you can't control your habitual speech and the way that you're speaking to people, if you can't control your actions, you're not going to be able to control your mind. To control your mind properly, if you can do this, this brings about these positive factors that I was saying. This brings about this ability to let go of greed, hatred, and delusion. So again, it's a kind of foundation that's there that we actually need. And if we do that, this is the thing that eventually leads us towards. You could say it's like if you have a house. And if you have a house, it's like it's great. You do need to actually have a decent house. You do need a good solid foundation. You need to pour concrete. You need to have like an actual frame within the house. But if you just have the frame there, obviously, well, the wind's going to come in and all these kinds of things. But without that frame, you can't put the walls up. You can't put the cladding on. Once you've got the cladding, then you can put insulation in, you can put cladding on, you can put proper windows in, you can do all these kinds of things, and you have a house that protects you, and then you paint it and all these kinds of, I'm giving a very simplistic explanation of building a house here, but you can see without that foundation, that structure, without the actual frame of the house, you can't have the rest of the house. You can have it, but it's going to blow down. It's going to be useless. So again, it's not this kind of one-to-one, you're moral, then you become enlightened. No, it's you reflect on your morality, and it builds all these wholesome qualities in the mind, and it keeps the mind away from these negative qualities that might come about in the mind. Does that make more sense? Yep, good. Thank you. Good. Yeah. There's one question here. Yep. Is there a lot of questions online, or? Okay, yeah, cool.
Hi.
Hi.
Really enjoyed your speech. Thanks.
You.
Is there another word that we could use rather than morality? Because in my listening, it brought up value judgment.
Yeah. Yeah.
It brought up right, wrong.
Yep.
It actually stopped me from listening cleanly.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of this.
Yep.
So is there another word that we could actually use which would take the value judgment away from the word moral?
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether other people in the room, when you hear the word moral, that it brings up being immoral, being... I'm not sure whether I'm explaining myself correctly.
I understand you 100%.
So in what other way could we
it's one
take the word moral out of it?
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's sometimes it's good to shift the word because it allows other people to access the concept well. But sometimes we shift the word so much then the concept actually doesn't mean anything anymore. So moral is actually a really hard one. You can go, well, ethics. You need to focus on your ethical engagement in the world. Now, that might be suitable for somebody else, but it's like if you're trained in philosophy, it's like, oh God, ethics is talking about ethics. Are you talking about meta ethics?
So what is our true distinction of the word moral?
Yeah, so it's okay. This is where we can get into some deep water here. So, yeah.
If I may say,
yeah.
I would say it's a wholesome action. An action that doesn't hurt you, doesn't hurt another, and doesn't hurt each other. I think that's what the Buddha said.
Okay.
It's a wholesome action. Good speech, kind speech is wholesome. If you're harsh, someone is going to hurt someone. So I look at the piety steps as being harmless. Because if you keep the piety steps, people will gravitate to it. They trust you. They know you will not harm them. So I think...
So when you hear the word moral, what...
I would say, I'm not afraid of morality or word, but if you want it to be more acceptable, I would say wholesome action. That's how I take Dhamma's class, the kids. So I say, we promote the word wholesome. So that action that you just did, somebody will just get you back. How did that work? Is it a wholesome action? What came out of it? Who got hurt by it? So I think if you look at it that way, that's how I...
Yeah, it's a great way of hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. That's good. It's good. It's a better answer than I would have given. So I would probably get like spiral down kind of thing once I start talking about what's the meaning of a particular word. But so I think
Is there a word that we could use?
Yeah, harmlessness is a good one. Ethics is another one. We call it, if you're looking from Buddhist perspective, kusala kamma. Kusala means skillful or wholesome action. Akusala kamma is unskillful, unwholesome action. In Buddhism, we have a few different words. We have you could say what we call papa and punya. Papa is again like a bad kind of bad. Evil's a little bit strong, but then punya is meritorious and good. So we have obviously we have a lot of words that we can use. Now I think the thing to remember is that, say for example, when I say morality, it brings up a particular kind of value judgment in different people, and everybody here is going to have a different interpretation of what that value judgment is. I think it's something about, we all know what morality, it's like that kind of, you know the thing when you hear it. You don't need to be told exactly what this thing is. You know what morality is. So I think it's a matter of us individually as well going, well, what is the kind of word that works for me? I know what morality is, but yeah, it brings about all this kind of baggage of, Christian morality or utilitarian morality and all these kinds of things. So morality is not a great word. What's something that works for me? So, and it's hard, it's hard. Like we have to sort of find something that works well for us. Like say, for example, Yasmin, like harmlessness. This is something that works well. This might resonate with other people as well. Some other people might go, well, that doesn't resonate with me. So I think it's about something where you have to dig into it a lot yourself and find the thing that works for you. What does, for me, what does being moral mean? What does being immoral mean? What does being ethical mean? What does being unethical mean? What does kusala kamma mean to me? What does akusala kamma mean to me? What does bapa, what does punya mean to me? So if we can do this, then we actually find how we understand this thing, and then we can use that as a framework going forward. Again, the core of the concept is the main thing here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the core of the concept. How you label the concept, that's going to differ for different people. Yeah. So I think whatever works the best for you, then use that. I'm just going to keep using morality because if you get me into the meaning of words, I'm gonna spiral.
Susan, did you have something to say?
Thanks. Ajahn, I just wanted to say that one way I've found it really helpful to look at my own keeping of the precepts is to think of it in terms of my mindfulness. And mindfulness is a quality that I don't think any of us have a great deal of problem with
for sure.
accepting as something to cultivate.
Yeah.
And one thing that's always really been brought home to me very strongly that, which I'm sure is the same for everybody in the room, that mindfulness is not just an abstract quality. Mindfulness is a state of awareness that has to be of something.
Yeah.
Mindfulness is always mindfulness of something. It doesn't exist in empty space by itself.
Yep.
So then we can have mindfulness of the impact of what I'm thinking of doing. What would that cause if I'm thinking of charging the dinner to the company account rather than just to bring up Srijit's first example, what are the ramifications of that in terms of the decision I make? It's not just that the company is multinational and has got mega bucks to spend, but it's to do with me and telling the truth, me and my own perceptions of my actions. So another really good example is in the world today is mindfulness of the consequences of meat eating, for example, of killing animals. So it's to do with cruelty, it's to do with cultivating land in a way that doesn't produce huge amounts of methane into the air. It's all sorts of things. So it's to do with mindfulness of consequences, isn't it, more than anything? And some people use that term. They look at it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Thich Nhat Hanh was quite famous for using sort of like mindful living, mindful engagement, and all these kinds of things. So so it's a good thing. There's probably time for one last question. If it's not a throw me out of the ballpark kind of question. If it's an easy one, I can do this in a few minutes.
Ajahn, just a comment. Thank you, Ajahn, for your thought-provoking talk with a reference to Mahanama Sutra. Totally agree that silent reflection definitely help us to become a better person and overcome our own defilements.
Cool. Thanks. Oh, okay. It's a compliment. That's a good thing. We can end on a compliment. There's no better place to stop than on a compliment. So we might end it up here. So any other announcements? Okay.
That's it. Well, thanks everyone. Please join us next door for the lunchdown at in just a couple of minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All the best. Yeah. Let's do that. We'll just pay respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha first. Thanks. Anybody that wants to. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami